Hello chess fans, I am very excited to show you the game of the day with Magnus Carlsen. It's a thriller of a game, and you know in chess it always takes two to tango. Without an opponent who doesn't want to play, who doesn't want to fight, well, it's very difficult to create something. But in round 9, Magnus Carlsen is playing against Vladimir Fedoseev, a Russian-born player representing Slovenia. He is always looking for a fight. He is not afraid of anyone. And that leads to very interesting type of chess where both players are trying to play for a win. I'm going to show you the game. I hope you will enjoy it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel not to miss any of the updates of the Olympiad as we are reaching almost the end of this event. And let's see who is going to win this Olympiad. Well, here we go. Magnus playing with the white pieces. He goes for 1d4. d5, knight f3, and Fedoseev plays here the move c5. It's very well-known idea to challenge the center, but here we do have a kind of a new opening as white goes for the move c4, pawn takes d4, and white first captures the pawn on d5. And before recapturing with the queen, black decides here, well, I prefer to develop my knight to f6. Rather, black takes back with a minor piece. Knight takes d4, knight takes d5. Symmetrical position. So it looks like it might become a boring game. But usually in positions with a symmetrical pawn structure, two open files, the side with the initiative is usually having a good time here. White playing with an extra tempo. He's a move up, of course. So let's see how it goes. Magnus plays here the move e4. Attacking the knight, clearing the path for the bishop to be developed. And after knight f6, the bishop goes out to b5 right away with check. Black blocks the check with the bishop. And now the knight comes out to c3. So, well, one of the ideas is that if black does take, you can take back with the knight from d4. Then the d file is open, so the queens can be exchanged. But with the knight on b5, black always got to watch out for knight forks on c7. That's why black doesn't feel tempted here to take immediately and instead goes for the move e5, attacking the knight on d4. Bishop takes d7, check, queen takes, and now the knight on d4 is still under threat, of course. So the knight goes to f5. The knight looks very nicely placed, but after queen takes d1, king takes d1, well, black just continues here with the move knight c6. And what is the knight gonna do? Well, the knight looks nice, but doesn't have a good square to go to next. And well, here, white continues developing with the move bishop g5. It's still a battle for the initiative. Despite the fact that queens have been exchanged, white is really trying to play as actively as possible, with the main idea now to take on f6. And if black is forced to recapture, well, then the knight is even looking much nicer on f5, as black will not be able to kick the knight away anytime soon. Plus, that the other knight can come into d5. So here, black also is playing very sharp with the move knight g4, avoiding that exchange of bishop against knight. Black is threatening to take the pawn on f2 with a knight fork. So white goes with his king to e2, protecting the pawn, and now the rooks are connected. So if you look at this position, you think, okay, only white can be better here. White is somewhat better developed, but with the move f6, white also got to decide how to develop the bishop. So that's a difficult question. There are not many attractive squares available. You don't want to go back to e3, then black can always take it. If you go back to d2, well, in that case, you're obstructing the open file, so white will not be able to use the file straight away. So the bishop goes to h4, but as you can see, the bishop is somewhat offside, and black played here the move h5. Remarkable move, but there are two main ideas behind it. As first of all, black has these ideas to trap the bishop with g5. If the bishop goes to g3, then h4, and the bishop will be trapped. The second idea is that after the move f3, the knight can now go back to h6. And if you do take on h6, you can always take back with the rook. That's much nicer. If the pawn would have been on h7, you had to take back with the g-pawn, creating double pawns. That's very ugly. Actually, if you do take here, rather than taking back right away, it is knight d4 check. That's a very clever move. So the king got to move now, and then his rook takes h6 with an even better version. So you see that black really would like to trade off that knight on f5 to get access with the knight to d4. Therefore, the bishop goes back to f2. So the bishop is now nicer placed on this diagonal and preventing the knight from coming in to d4. Well, first knight takes f5, pawn takes f5. Double pawns for white, but white also has now control over the e4 square, which can be used by the knight or perhaps even another piece later on. Black decided here to castle queenside, rook hd1. Rook takes rook, white recaptures. And now, beautiful idea by black as how to complete your development. Now, a lot of people would expect black to move the bishop and get the rook over to d8. That's, let's say, the traditional way of playing. But h4 is a real fighting move, as after the move king d3, black develops the rooks to h5, attacking the pawn on f5. And now you see that white, with his last move, had intended now to play the move king e4, defending the pawn. And the king is all of a sudden on a very active square. But what is the rook going to do? Well, rook g5. Interesting idea. Now, if black gives up the pawn on h4, it is rook takes g2, and the rook is super active. That's something white doesn't really want at all. So you got to do something about that pawn. And I think the simplest move here would be a move like g4. And after taking, you may take back right away, but you can also play something like bishop e3 to attack the rook. And after rook goes away, you play h takes g3. I mean, white is a little bit better thanks to the active king. I don't really like the bishop on f8 as it's placed on the same color as the pawns. So maybe white is a tad better in such an endgame. But white played here this move, rook to g1. And frankly, I'm not a fan of such moves. I only will go to such a square with my rook, going passively if I have no other choice. It feels like the rook is deactivated here, only defending the pawn. And black senses that he's sort of okay after this move. Goes for the move g6. Very, very cool idea. Not minding the pawn on h4. And well, there are some important lines. I mean, in the game, white decided here to take the pawn. But let me show you, if you take on g6, black is going to play f5, active move, king goes back, and then rook takes g6. And anyway, this pawn on h4 is not hanging. As you do take it, it's bishop c5. The bishop becomes active. Once the rook moves, black is going to take the pawn on g2 with very active play. So, in any case, white decided here to take on h4 right away, attacking the rook. But look at this. Pawn takes f5 with check. And look, where's the king going now? Not backwards. Magnus is playing super ambitiously here with the move king d5. But where is this king going? The rook is still under threat. If the rook moves, the pawn on f6 might be hanging. So the rook goes back to g6. And now it's this move, king e6. Absolutely remarkable idea. But you're attacking the pawn. You have a clear idea. You're even thinking about playing the move king f7 with a double attack, hitting the rook, hitting the bishop. So, of course, you can feel the pressure here. What should black do? In fact, there are a number of options. One very cool line, which was not played in the game, is this move knight to d4 check. You're defending the pawn. If the king goes to f7 with this double attack, there is rook g7. You're giving up the bishop on f8. But then there is knight e6. The king has made a touchdown, has reached the other side of the board. Knight defending the rook, king e8, knight c7, king f8, knight e6 would have been an incredible repetition of moves. It's not something I have seen such a repetition that often at the other side of the board. It's a well-known drawing pattern with rook and knight, but it doesn't happen too often. Anyway, I think this is a line Fedoseev must have seen. It's not difficult to calculate. You look at this kind of forcing ideas, and it really shows, in my opinion, that Fedoseev is no longer playing for a draw with black. He wants to play for more. He goes for bishop c5, attacking the rook. Now the rook goes to h1. And now, okay, still these pawns are vulnerable. So black play the move knight d4 now anyway first. And, well, razor sharp position. If the king goes to f7, was not played in the game, there's a rook takes g2. And once again, rook is super active. You can take on f6, black can take on f3. And then white can run with the pawn. This looks incredibly sharp. How is this pawn going to be stopped? Well, black has to put a bishop on e3. So when the pawn reaches h6, black is going to sack the bishop. And in the meantime, all these remaining pawns can try to be exchanged, while also black still has passed pawns in the center. Looks like anything can happen in such an endgame. But Magnus, instead of going forward with the king, he drops back to d5 to hit the bishop. Bishop is defended by the pawn, and now you would maybe expect white to do something about the pawn on g2. But Magnus, once again, fighting for the initiative with this move, f4. He wants to challenge, undermine the pawn on e5. If that pawn is gone, let's say you take, well, there's something like bishop f2, and white is trying to dismantle black's active pieces in the center. It's still absolutely unclear, but white looks absolutely safe. But in the game, there followed this move. King to d7. What is black contemplating here? Well, that white king is not having that many squares here at all. And well, it's a super sharp position. A lot of ideas here. But Magnus goes forward here with another absolutely insane move, as he played here the move g4. And probably this is something you would not have expected at all. In fact, it's not such a good idea. Well, if you take with a rook, white's idea is that the rook is no longer defending the pawn on f6. And well, here white is doing fine. But what should black do? Well, in the game, we will see that pawn takes g4 was played. But black missed here a clear win with this move, knight to c2. Threatening checkmate on e3. If you take on e5, it's checkmate with a knight. So that's not possible. If you do take with the pawn on f5, attacking the rook, now the rook can even come to g4 to hit the bishop. And for instance, if you take with the pawn on e5, then, well, the fourth rank is cleared again. It's knight e3 with checkmate. Same sort of mating pattern. White is in huge trouble with a knight. If you take on f6, for instance, it's a rook takes f4 with similar mating ideas. There's always like bishop e5, knight e3. It's the same mating pattern, cooperation of these three pieces by black. It's absolutely stunning. Taking with the king on e5, it's also bishop d6. You defend the rook first, king d5, knight e3. Beautiful mating patterns in the middle of the board. The best option for white here is to go with the bishop back to g5 to hit the rook. But then again, it's knight e3. The king can take on e5, but after that it is rook takes f5. The king got to move, and then you pick up the bishop. Black wins a piece. So knight c2 would have won the game, but the game goes on. There is pawn takes g4, and now you can safely capture with the pawn on e5. Pawn takes e5. Now don't be too greedy. In case of king takes e5, it is knight f3. Double fork, a double check. King f5, knight takes h4, and the knight defends the rook at the same time as well. So Magnus comes up with a very good, clever, practical decision to avoid the pawn capture. Put a knight on e4. Now finally feels like white is back in control. The knight is controlling the blockading square, and the game goes on. Knight f3, and bishop is on the threat, and I think a lot of people would just expect here something like bishop g3. Feels pretty safe. At some point you may take on c5, maybe at some point the pawn on e5 can be hanging as well. Looks like white is okay, but Magnus is playing for more. He captures the bishop immediately. Pawn takes c5, black is still threatening the bishop, so now that bishop goes to g3, but the difference is that the knight is no longer on e4, and black comes in with rook d6, check. King takes pawn, and now the rook goes to d2. So the pawns are about to be taken very soon, and white has to be incredibly careful here. If you lose the pawns on a2 and b2, then black will be 2 pawns up. So how to defend? Well, apparently a move like h3, just to try to swap as many pawns as possible. That's the right strategy. Now, if you, for instance, go for rook g2, You can even give up the bishop, like the bishop is in trouble, but with all these pawns coming off the board, taking on g4, preparing rook to h7 and take the pawn on a7, this endgame of rook and knight versus rook, it's theoretical a draw. So that would have been a good choice, but Magnus thinks about the move rook to c1, and his idea is to go rook c4 and take the pawn on g4. That could be a nice idea. If you have the rook on the 4th rank, the pawn on e5 is not dangerous and white can run with his own pawn. But I suppose that Magnus underestimated the next move, king e6. As now after rook c4, king f5, black saves the pawn on g4. And well, there are issues with the pawn on h2, with the pawn on b2, so black is going to win material. Rook a4 played, knight takes h2, and well, the position becomes pretty bad. In the game, white decided here to eliminate that knight on h2. I want to show you this line. If you go rook takes pawn, the knight goes back to f3, and if you start running here, well, the problem is that the bishop is actually trapped on g3. Black can take it on the next move. If white is going to run, you just take anyway. The b pawn can always be stopped in time. The rook gets behind the pawn, and well, very soon black's pawn is becoming a new queen. So in the game, bishop takes h2 played, but here we do get a rook endgame in which black does have two passed pawns, and these pawns, they are too strong. They can count on the support of the king, the rook. After white goes a4 is rook c2 check, king b5. The king is pushed away even further, g3, rook g7, king f4, a5. You give a rook check, king c6, rook a2. That's where the rook belongs, behind the passed pawn. You're always controlling the queening square. So king b6 played, black runs now with the other pawn, e4, a6, e3. This is very good strategy, because that means that very soon the white rook has to choose between the e file or the g file. Rook f7 check, king e4, rook e7, king f3. Well, the king can always hide. Rook f7, the king goes in front of the g pawn, so keeping the path for the e pawn free. a7, e2. Here you see black is first, threatening to get a new queen, while the rook covers the threat a8 queen. Rook e7, king f2, rook check, king e3, rook e7. Where is that king going? Look at this. This is something you can remind for your future rook endgames. The king goes to the file of the enemy's king. Now, after rook d7, king c1, rook c7, king b1. White no longer has a check. There is this threat of e1 queen, and white resigned because of rook e7, and then the other pawn comes to g2, when you're even threatening to promote with check. So here, Fedoseev won the game after king b1, a very big point, probably one of the biggest victories in his career. I mean, the two have played multiple times against each other, but this is such a huge win. So that is really also a nice message to all of us. Not that we can beat Magnus, but whenever you play against a higher rated opponent, it's a very good thing not to show any fear and just play freely. Try to outplay like you're playing a random opponent. Don't stare yourself blind on your opponent's rating or his status. It's a very impressive fighting game by Fedoseev. And I hope you liked it as well. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and then I will cover many more exciting games of this Olympiad. Thanks for watching.